We have a session that is about the relationship between bodies and their spaces, spaces in buildings, in architecture, in the city, urban spaces. And the papers really propose that through understanding the use of a space, the experience of a space, the ordering of a space, that we can really start to see a sort of self-portrait of the user, of the inhabitant. Our first speaker is Annmarie Adams. And just a little bit to introduce her, Annmarie Adams is director and William C. McDonald professor at the School of Architecture at McGill University. Her research combines an interest in medicine and architecture, but also women and architecture. And sometimes they come together beautifully, such as in the book Architecture in the Family Way, Doctors, Houses, and Women, 1870 to 1900. I want to mention two other books by her that deal with these themes. We have Medicine by Design, The Architect and the Modern Hospital, 1893 to 1943. And we also have Designing Women, that this is co-authored, Designing Women, Gender and the Architectural Profession. She'll be speaking today about the Canadian cardiologist Maude Abbott, and please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Catherine. This paper may be a little different than most of the others at this conference because the subject of the paper is actually not a maker of images or spaces, and I'm trying to propose a methodology that lets us read spaces made by others as a way at getting at the subject's life story. So this portrait on the screen now shows Maude Abbott at age 21, graduating from McGill University with a Bachelor of Arts in 1890. The award-winning graduate went on to become a world-famous cardiologist, best known posthumously for her work on congenital heart malformations. Abbott may seem like an unexpected research subject for an architectural historian, which Shirk, by the way, noted. The intention of this paper today is to explore the role of architectural and material history in the writing of feminist biography. Through Abbott, I think we can revisit the life spaces she inhabited and the global networks her research generated to write a new kind of architectural history of the medical museum. Indeed, this project of mine kickstarts a book-length architectural history and sabbatical of the medical museum, a hugely significant teaching tool in medicine before the advent of imaging technologies. I propose that through this experimental method, we can envisage a new type of life story that might better capture women's lives, what I call a spatial biography. In such a project, the methods of architectural and medical history flirt with those of feminist biography, testing Carolyn Heilbrun's unforgettable thesis in writing a woman's life about the inappropriateness of traditional biography as a framework for women's lives. She said, reading women's lives needs to be considered in the absence of a structure of critical or biographical commonplaces. It all needs to be reinvented, discovered, or re-said. Equally inspiring is architectural historian Dana Arnold's 2007 proposition that women's biography and space are in dynamic interplay. Arnold calls for an interrogation of the spatial boundaries that have worked towards women's exclusion in the making of accounts of our experiences. In her opening essay to the co-edited collection, whose cover shows here, Biographies in Space, Arnold describes what she calls the biographical traces we all leave behind, belongings, spaces, and texts that contribute to our life stories. Arnold compellingly suggests that such traces, evolving in time and intersecting with one another, help us to, quote, think about architecture, or rather the space it encloses and the meanings and identities that can be conferred on objects within that space. The space and the objects do not change, but our understanding of them does, and this can be influenced by social and cultural circumstances. Arnold actually uses an example, not how knowing that Henry Faucillon had died in a bed in which she slept in at the Getty changed her understanding of the performative qualities of the built environment. As a student physician, researcher, teacher, and curator, Abbott left many material traces in the built and archival environments that have attracted next to no scholarly attention. Architecture is among the most significant of those unexamined traces. Arnold asserts the importance of architecture to biography. Architecture is not just a platform for viewing the subject, it also produces the subject, she says. I contend, too, that the multiple biographies of Abbott, for example, Maude Abbott, a memoir, The Abbotts of McGill, Maude of McGill, and most recently the fictionalized story, The Heart Specialist, are in desperate need of feminist critique. Why is Abbott consistently called by her first name, or its diminutive, Maude? We only think of Cher, Madonna, Hillary, Oprah, Martha, Ellen, and a host of others. Equally frustrating is the emphasis writers, and even Abbott herself, have placed on Abbott's love for her work and her institution, perhaps because of her specialty of caring for malformed hearts. In her autobiographical sketch published in 1959, Abbott wrote about this affection as if for another woman. I was literally in love with McGill, or so the girls said, and I have never really fallen out of love with her since. Biographer Donald Waugh writes, there can be no doubting of Maude's affection for McGill, but it was such a one-sided romance that she might have been forgiven if she'd walked away from it. His Maude of McGill is the most offensive of all the books in this regard, even including a chapter entitled The Museum's Lover. Both his use of the name Maude and his insistence that Abbott's connection to her work was emotional and romantic are misguided and sexist. Most significantly, like many other pioneering women in science, Abbott's story is always told through narratives of constraint, as if a series of closed doors, as if her career could not have unfolded in any other way, through doors opened by men, of course, in this case. Alternatively, if we tell a woman's life story through things and places, might we escape the patriarchal trap of traditional biography? Arnold says that through biographical traces and their representations, the linear discourse of history is disrupted and transformed. A good example is how architectural historian Alice Friedman has reinterpreted the canonical Farnsworth house through its client, Edith Farnsworth, rather than through its architect, Mies van der Rohe, leading to a completely different understanding of the famous glass and steel house. Certainly the photographic trace documents Abbott's male-dominated sphere. Growing up in rural St. Andrews East, Quebec, that's in the Laurentians, Maude Abbott first moved to Montreal as a high school student. Despite graduating at the top of her Bachelor of Arts class at McGill and serving as valedictorian for a virtually all-male cohort, Abbott was denied entry to McGill's medical school on the grounds that medicine was an inappropriate career for women. This is a big, big deal in all of the biographies, of course. So she went to Bishop's College, also in Montreal at that time, which promoted itself as a more liberal school. Her anomalous position in the Montreal medical scene is evident in this photograph of the Royal Victoria Hospital Surgical Theatre, where the distinguished physician William Osler, a major protagonist in all accounts of Abbott's life, performs an autopsy. Abbott is in the center of the top row. Hope you can spot her there, watching the proceedings from a shadowy vantage point, perhaps even wearing a dark veil across her face. She's right, you can barely see her. Although she occupies the center of the image, she is in the furthest row from the central actor, Osler, and is the sole figure in the group whose face is not illuminated. After medical training in Europe, Abbott returned to Montreal in 1897, and the next year was appointed curator of McGill University's Medical Museum, presumably in lieu of an opportunity to treat live patients. Her mandate as curator was to organize the collection of specimens amassed since 1823 for teaching purposes and cataloging 180 specimens collected by Osler himself from 750 autopsies performed at the Montreal General Hospital. Here you see the first purpose-built site of the university's medical museum. in a rather strange conglomerative building designed by Hopkins and Wiley in 1872, with significant additions by Andrew Taylor in 1885, 95, 97, 1901, which eventually dwarfed the original building. The museum was just inside the front door, right here, in a squarish room to the right. 9 years later, a fire tore through the university's old medical, destroying the adjacent anatomical museum and 2,000 pathological specimens, including the entire bone collection. 1,000 specimens were secured, including the famous three-chambered heart known as the Holmes heart, still considered McGill's most valuable artifact. In a 2009 fictionalized account of Abbott's life, The Heart Specialist, which by the way I think is one of the best books about Abbott, novelist Claire Holden Rothman describes the scene after the fire when Abbott first spotted the burnt-out building from a distance, drawing on a literary analogy. I felt like Jane Eyre returning to Thornfield Manor after the mad woman had torched it. With the Faculty of Medicine left homeless, a new building was constructed, the Strathcona Medical Building, opening its doors in 1909. Significantly, the new stately building was the outcome of an architectural competition, eventually won by Brown and Valence, who were also responsible for the Montreal Children's Memorial Hospital, which was just across from the Montreal General. 7 other firms were invited to participate in the competition, and we have all the documents regarding it, plans, elevations, and sections on the very busy corner of Pine and University, the northwest corner of the campus. The competition identified no cost limits, and aside from a fairly complicated program, no other special requirements. The submissions were remarkably diverse, representing the architect's own interpretations of the complex site and requirements for medical education. As such, they are outstanding architectural evidence of the history of medical education. Brown and Valence's winning scheme gave the museum utmost importance, with adjacent spaces defined only in their relation to the gallery spaces. A journalist writing in Canadian Architect and Builder emphasized this connection. Abbott's administrative center was likely in this 43 by 30 foot room, which you can see in pink, on the ground floor just east of the museum. Functioning as a workroom, prep room, and museum storage, Abbott likely shared these quarters with the specimens yet to be classified and prepared for display. And note that according to the building's strict symmetry, this room has the identical footprint and location to the lecture room on the first floor and the anatomical theater on the second floor. These rooms are stacked vertically, illustrating how museum curatorship and teaching had equal functional weights in the medical curriculum at this time. I propose that this is a way of measuring the weight of someone's influence in the curriculum. As you can see in this campus site plan and period postcard, the museum and its larger container, the Strathcona building, occupy the heart of medical education and served as a connector between the hospital and the university, which is, sorry, the building is right here, and this is the Royal Victoria Hospital just across from it. I like to think of the two buildings actually as dance partners across Pine Avenue. This is the Royal Victoria Hospital was just abandoned last week. It's now closed as a hospital, so this will have a huge impact on the Strathcona building, losing its dance partner. As the specimen collection moved into the new Strathcona building, Abbott oversaw the transfer of surviving material and was really given a blank slate upon which to realize her ideal museum. While these architectural traces point to her curatorial effectiveness and the rising importance of the museum in medical education, Abbott's professional network also had spatial oomph. Apart from her most famous book, The Atlas of Congenital Cardiac Disease, Abbott's main textual trace is the run showing here of the Bulletin of the International Association of Medical Museums, for which she served as editor for 31 years. She used the bulletin, described in its inaugural issue as an organ, as an arena from which to call for new specimens after the McGill fire. And these specimens actually arrived at McGill COD from hospitals around the world, and we have a record of every specimen, how much it cost to send it, and the story behind the body it came from. Two spatial networks show Abbott's rise to prominence in the medical world. This map is a graphic analysis of the archive of Abbott's letters, numbering 213, currently held in the Osler Library. The places of origin of correspondence received from individuals appear here as red dots. So the line from Montreal to Perugia, for example, is one piece of correspondence, and the thick black line shows the number of pieces. So the city with the highest number of letters is New York. The map shows that during her career, Abbott's influence was far-reaching. Many physicians wrote to her to gain advice on particular cases. The second map shows the home bases of authors she brought to the Bulletin from 1907 to 1938. Denied access to traditional hospital wards and classrooms, Abbott engaged the journal as a textual classroom or space that had global reach. Researchers and curators from around the world, especially the United States, presented their work in an orderly framework designed by Abbott for the benefit of medical students. I offer this architectural analysis of the Strathcona building and these two analytical diagrams of her spatial reach as counterparts to the traditional spin biographers take on the role of two famous men in her life story. Let's look at one, Osler, through a biographical trace. This is the letter from William Osler from January 1908 that Abbott apparently carried around in her purse for every day since the day she received it, and it was in her purse when she died. As you can see, it praises Abbott's work as the best thing written on the subject in the English language. Has the significance of this Osler connection grown out of proportion in the biographical narratives? Perhaps it functions the same way that Betsy Ross's legendary narrative, told through her unannounced meeting with George Washington, satisfies our appetite for female heroines created by powerful men. This famous legend overshadows the history of the United States flag and a spatialized life story of Ross so beautifully told in Marla Miller's recent biography of America's famous favorite seamstress. Okay. I don't mean to suggest that non-woman biographers cannot see Abbott's life in a positive way. Among the most interesting of Abbott's visual legacies is her depiction in famous painter Diego Rivera's A History of Cardiology, murals for the National Institute of Cardiology. National Institute of Cardiology in Mexico City. Like the photographer of the RVH Surgical Theater, Rivera positions Abbott at the top of a pyramidal composition. I don't know if I could do, you can see the detail here on the right. He wrote, Diego Rivera was told that the picture should indicate the ascending trend of knowledge, and it should, if possible, express how slow and difficult has been the advance of men to fight routine, prejudice, ignorance, and fanaticism. The only woman and only Canadian included in the mural, Rivera's Abbott tends to a child and is accompanied by a nurse. Perhaps conscious of the significance of material traces in Abbott's career, Rivera also includes a museum specimen, as you can see under the glass, and her celebrated atlas. Nonetheless, and perhaps because she appears to be tending to a child, some art historians have mistaken her for a pediatric cardiologist. There is no doubt in my mind, however, that Rivera looked to this photograph, as you can see on the left, included in McDermott's biography, as a model for the painting. Okay. And there is the diagram for the specimen. Abbott's influence as a curator waned when the collection from the Strathcona moved to the Pathology Institute in 1923, shown here in an original watercolor by Scottish-born, Montreal-based architect Percy Nobbs. The story goes that Abbott's former technician, Ernest Lionel Judah, moved with the collection to Nobbs' splendid new institute, while Abbott stayed in the Strathcona building as curator of what became the Central Medical Museum, basically became like spinning wheels and medical tools. By the 1930s, the rotunda in the Strathcona Medical Building, which once housed Abbott's specimens, accommodated totem poles. Indeed, medical historian Jonathan Reinartz has noted that the importance of museums really waned in medical education about the time of World War II. But this trace evidence of Abbott's life, I think, suggested the decline began a generation earlier. Writing a spatial biography of Abbott has offered us a different understanding of Abbott's work and life. Museum spaces in 3 unique buildings, Old Medical, Strathcona, and the Pathology Institute, her correspondence and editorial work, and her legacy in named spaces direct us on a different course than the traditional signposts of her biographers, who emphasize her rejection from McGill, her curatorship over physicianship, doors held variously open and closed by figures like Osler. Architecture in this methodology is more than a platform for viewing the subject, as Arnold asserts, but is also producing the subject. User-based architectural history, or spatial biography, as I've called it here, destabilizes traditional architectural history, making room, or even rooms, for women. Thank you very much.